morning, this early in the morning, actually. So I don't have a presentation, and usually when I have speaking engagements, what I like to do is um, try not to make it so formal. So, which is why I have more so it's just a conversation. So I'll tell you guys a little bit about my background, and then just kind of go into really just take that and segue into question and answer. So if there are very specific things that you guys want to know about or talk about, how was this experience? How did I decide I wanted to do that, or whatever the case may be? Just open it up for questions like that. I think that's the easiest way, at least for me. So, but as Michaela said or mentioned, I am from this small town called Utah, Alabama, EUTAW, right? So a lot of people have not heard of it, but it is a small rural town located in lower West Alabama. And so for people who are Southern people or people who are familiar with public health, it's a region that's called the Black Belt region. And it's called the Black Belt region because long time ago, many moons ago, the soil in that area was completely black and rich, and they had very high crop yields and different things like that. But it was also a route that ran along the coastal side or the borders of the different states for slave trade. So it spans about 19 counties. But anyway, I am from the Black Belt region. I left there high school in 2006. Oh, God. And then I went to Auburn University where I studied nutrition dietetics and I minored in public health at Auburn. I left Auburn or graduated from Auburn in 2012, and I immediately transitioned into a Master's of Public Health program in Nashville, Tennessee. And so in Nashville, I did the MPH program at Tennessee State University, and I concentrated on behavioral health and education. Once I completed the Masters of Public Health, I transitioned to Atlanta and started working for the Department of Public Health as a WIC nutritionist for about 2 years. Um, excuse me. And then after I started that, or after I worked there for 2 years, I kind of realized that with the degree in nutrition, it was sort of challenging to sort of elevate without having the RD credential. And so if you wanted to do anything more, you pretty much had to complete a dietetic internship and sit for the RD exam. Is if you want to do it and stay in nutrition. So after working for 2 years, I decided that I wanted to go back to school, but I went after the doctorate in public health first. So I started that program in 2015. Um, and I was commuting from Atlanta to Statesboro 3 days a week. And then in 2016, I unintentionally gotten accepted into the dietetic internship while I was doing my doctoral program. So I took a year off from the DRPH program to do the internship. And then once I finished, I picked back up on my doctoral courses. So, which is why it's taken me such a long time to get to where I am, the dissertation phase now. Um, but so it has been quite an extensive journey, but that's sort of the synopsis version of it. And there are a lot of things that have happened and transpired in between that have helped me to sort of cultivate what my interests are. Um, as I mentioned, I am from a small rural town. And so initially, just because I'm more connected to it and more familiar, my initial interests have always been rural medicine or rural nutrition, but more specifically, food insecurities and food deserts. And I have tried as much as I can to get away from that, but every time I do, I'm always drawn back to it. So I've worked in all of the areas of nutrition that lets me know that regardless of what I'm doing, I will be working in food deserts and food, or working as an advocate for food deserts and food insecurities and food swamps. But I have worked in clinical as a clinical dietitian. I have worked in public health as a WIC dietitian. My most recent job before transitioning to Life University was I was a director of food nutrition services at a Georgia War Veterans Home, which is a long-term care facility in Middle Georgia that's attached to the VA. So I was their clinical dietitian, but also their director of food services. So I managed the budget, the menu development, hiring, leading the 3 kitchens, all that stuff, food service, food safety 101. So I've had all 3 of those experiences as well. But all of them together have collectively driven me back to now academia, because long-term goal is to, once I finish the DRPH program, is to ultimately sort of climb the ranks of academia. So maybe department head, from department head, assistant dean, and ultimately dean. And the goal is to sort of sit at the head of the table in such a way that it will create a space for me to have those types of conversations, whether it's Life University or Georgia State, Auburn, whatever the case may be. I definitely want to have a school or have a program that's heavily devoted to impacting food insecurity, whether it's in Georgia, whether it's in Alabama, or whatever the case may be. And so I think in order to be able to do that is to sort of have a terminal degree, in some sort of way to show that you kind of know what you're talking about, but also that you have sort of done your due diligence and work towards that particular area of interest as well, but also to just inspire and bring students in. I think that that's probably more important than anything. Um, but yeah, so that's sort of all of it in a nutshell. And then I can give more and go back and forth. But I kind of want to just, I know I've given you guys a lot, but I want to kind of open it up now for, again, the general conversation piece of it, where we can just kind of go back and forth about whatever it is in nutrition. If you guys have questions about me being a man in nutrition, me being a Black man in nutrition, me being a man in Alabama, a man from who has a nutrition background, but also being from the South. All those things play a part in how I um, treat and sort of connect with the various people and populations that I work with as well. So, what do y'all think?
I have a question.
Shoot, fire off. I really hate that I cannot see everybody's face.
I know, right? Okay, let me stop sharing my screen. So maybe.
Okay, so now I can see a cup. Let's see. I'll have to stroll to see, but it's totally fine. As long as you guys can see me and we can talk about it. Okay, so what's the question?
Okay, so in your bio, you mentioned how like you were always interested in healthcare, and
Hmm.
you were originally on the pharmacy and
Hmm.
osteopathic medicine route.
Hmm.
So, how did you make that transition from going from traditional medicine to just more preventative medicine?
Absolutely. Now that's a great, great question, and I don't get that question a lot. I guess I don't really tell people a lot that I started out as a pharmacy student. So, um, honestly, the way that I made organic chemistry may help me make the transition much easier. For whatever reason, when I was studying, so I was a biomedical science pre-pharmacy major. Okay. And that's just a fancy term for biology pre-med, basically. So, but of course, it's heavily rooted in the sciences. And of course, nutrition is as well. But for some reason, for me personally, the very abstract science courses do not resonate with me and my brain. So, for example, I remember, I gotten through general chemistry kind of fairly okay. Wasn't really a big deal. I kind of scraped by. Then I got into orgo, and it was like, okay, so you're gonna have to exercise a different type of muscle to get really to handle this, and it wasn't working. And so I never really understood it. I really, truly, truly did not understand. You could put, the teachers say, oh, we're gonna have the HCl, so we're gonna take this hydrogen and this chloride, and this is gonna take 2 atoms from this, and it's gonna come over here, and now you have hydrogen chloride. Me physically, like I could not see it, so it made no sense, and I struggled. And it only took me to make an F one time, and I said, okay, so we got to figure out something else because this ain't gonna work. Because I'll never get into school. So anyway, I started exploring just different options. But in that whole process of me struggling with the chemistries, I also kind of realized I was also taking a course called Intro to Health Professions. So with Dr. Beverly Childress is her name at Auburn. And Dr. Childress, it was a seminar class, and every week we would have a different speaker from health professions come in. And I realized, I was like, oh my God, like what they sound like they do is just so boring. Like pharmacy, it just sounds okay. Okay, so I'm a clinical pharmacist. It all sounded very boring to me. And at that time I actually hadn't even seen a dietitian, but what I realized, something was pulling me away from treatment, and I couldn't really figure out what it was. And I don't know, a lot of people, some people follow me on Instagram, a lot of people may not, but one thing that's noticeable and pretty obvious is I have a very large personality. I'm very much an extrovert. So me not having contact with people for 8 hours of a day, that's a challenge. And so I was concerned about that. And so I really started trying to explore what types of health professions would allow me to really interact with people more. And that's how I ended up adding the minor in public health. And once I realized, oh my God, all right, well, let me figure this out. So public health enables me to really be that. You can do multiple things. You can either be a clinical person or you can be a boots on the ground type of person. And the boots on the ground person was sort of what I envisioned myself being, like the face of whatever it was I was doing. I ended up switching to nutrition because I took a moment to decide that I didn't want to do pharmacy no more, but I didn't know if I wanted to do um, I didn't know if I wanted to go to DO school or if I wanted to go to PT school. Like I didn't really know. So I took an intro to nutrition course, and all of the science stuff came up again. Orgo, all that stuff came up again, but it came up differently. Like I could see it, and it sounds crazy, but I could physically see what it was doing to people who were experiencing X, Y, and Z. So I had a grandmother who has diabetes. I have had family members who struggle with cancers. And so when I was learning about it in nutrition, the difference was I had a physical thing that I could attach to it to say, oh my God, this is why this is happening. And so moving forward, it really was a no-brainer. I changed my major to nutrition and my grades turned around. Like I don't think outside of the chemistries, I ain't really see a lot of F's anymore. But that plus me pairing that with public health really opened up me to the whole concept of, you know, in order for you to truly, truly impact someone or impact people's lives in such a way, prevention is the route to go. And that's why I even wanted to go to DO school, because I never wanted to be sort of, oh, you sick, come see me. It's more so, how can we keep you from being, if you are terminally ill, how can we halt that or keep you from even, becoming ill in the first place? So public health really, I know that's an extended answer, but that's the truth. So nutrition and public health together really just allows me, or has allowed me, to sort of do something, because as we know, nutrition is attached to everything, right? We cook and eat for everything. If somebody has a baby, we bring food. If somebody passes away, we bring food. If it's a birthday, we bring food. So, holidays, we bring food. So that sits at the core of everything that the doctors and the nurses and the pharmacists treat. So if we can fix it from this perspective, from the beginning, then we've done our job.
Thank you. Thank
But,
you.
Can I jump in real quick?
yes, yes, yes.
So I normally don't participate in the NSN meetings because I'm the undergraduate program director and I like to let them do their own thing. But I just wanted to pop in and hear you talk. And I was looking at your bio on diversified dietetics last night.
Okay.
And first off, I also want to say when you were telling your story, like that is me. I went to Auburn. I was going to be pre-med. I was in the pre-health class, and they said, if you want to get into med school, they're going to look at your freshman and sophomore year maths and sciences. And I said, this isn't going to work for me because I went through the same struggles, but mine was with general chem and with calculus. But I wanted to say that I appreciated on your bio how you were so open with your struggles with organic chemistry and taking a few tries to pass the RD exam, because I think it makes it attainable for some students that maybe think, oh my gosh, this isn't for me. How could I ever get there? It's like, well, it's not like everybody in this position at the end, it's not like it was an easy ride for everyone. So I just wanted to say that I think it's great that you're so open about that.
Yeah, I honestly think and I tell that to to the students here, and I don't like to use the term my students, but I tell it to the students all the time here that you have to be very honest and realistic about the situation, and you have to figure out ways to sort of conjure up and keep yourself motivated throughout whatever journey, whether it's nutrition, whether it's pharmacy, whether it's nursing, if it's neither of those things, just in life in general. But the reason being is because these universities, Auburn included, and even here at Life, when we put out that our programs are X, Y, and Z, we're recruiting us. We want to recruit the top tier students, and that's totally fine. But what the university doesn't realize, and even Auburn they didn't do a good job about this sometimes, was that when you do that, you create this, you unintentionally create this pressure that that the students enter with, because it's pressure to get in and it's pressure to get out. And so now it's like she said, you thinking, well, I'm never going to get into this, I'm never going to get into that, because they create this picture that everybody who's came through this program has been top tier. We had a 4.0 GPA. We passed the RD exam on the first try. We had 100% of our students to get accepted to medical school and nursing school. And so you thinking like, well, Lord, no. When the reality of it is, there are a lot of people, myself included, who have had to struggle to get through this. And that is why, and you can tell it, and it's the difference in your delivery when it comes to talking to people. It's a difference in your delivery and in your practice as a provider. It's a difference in your professionalism and your respect for the profession, like all those things. I'm very open about my journey because it was just that, it was a journey. I failed that exam, and it was crazy because the first time I took it, I think it was right after Hurricane Harvey or whatever it was in Savannah that had tore up down there real bad. So I took the exam, and it was my own fault. I shouldn't have taken it anyway, knowing that I hadn't, because I was without power for 2 weeks, and the exam was coming up. Like, I was trying to study with a candle. Like, I knew better. But I said, well, I don't want to, I need to take it, because if not, I'm going to lose my job. So I took the exam. You got to have like a 25 or something like that. I can't remember. 25, 26, 25, I think. The first time I took it, I made like a 21. So I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job. So I had a meltdown. Okay. Because I only had $600 on my credit card, and that's all I was going to use. So because it was $200 per exam. So once them $600 was up, I had to have passed the exam because I didn't have no more money. So, okay, so then I didn't pass it, stressed out about it. I was like, okay, Ladere, it's like, we have to figure out a strategy. Okay. I took it again. The second time I took it, I made a 23. So at this point, like, I'm like furious. So I'm down to my last $200 at this point. I took it again, and I made exactly what I needed, which was a 25, which was fine, because since then, all nobody's ever asked me, oh, you passed the exam, what was your score? It was like, okay, do you have your license and your CDR? Yes. Okay, well, can you send that to me so we can hire you? And that's pretty much it. And so, but people don't, and this is, again, I hate to kind of bounce back and forth, but what I want to say about the reason for the exam, what we learn in public health, and I don't know if you guys have heard about these things or not, these concepts, but what we learn in public health is the social ecological model. And the social ecological model is basically, it just teaches us from a public health perspective that there are an sort of an interplay across levels in your life that affect the way in which you make decisions and the outcomes that happen because of those. Okay. So at that particular time, there are individual factors that you have to fight. There are sort of relationship factors or interpersonal factors that you have to take. There are societal, environmental factors, policy, organizational. All those levels interact in such a way that affects you. And so the decisions that you make are secondary to those, the interplay between those. And so you may be doing on one end what you think is absolutely right, but there's something else that may be affecting a level, one of those social ecological levels, that will cause you to have some sort of adverse effect. So for me at the time, it was organizational. At my organizational level, which was my job, it was creating an additional amount of stress on me, which was subsequently affecting my individual level because I couldn't focus on studying for the exam and all this other stuff. So in public health, we learned that those things will eventually affect our health in some sort of way. But it's the same thing. So I apply those same concepts in the way that I teach the students here. We talk about everything. We talk about everything from um, bringing students in, or bringing, when you're talking to your patients, I tell them, I say, you have to be looking and listening for the things that are unspoken. Because when you're in the hospital, or when you interact with patients and different things like that, clients, they're going to tell you a little bit of the story. It's up to you to sort of dig deeper and get the rest of it. And so, for example, my first time precepting last year, I had a student, my first student, she was furious. She comes back from this, her first time. She comes back from a patient's room, and she's telling me that he is non-compliant in his chart. He leaves against a medical advice. He always leaves AMA. He's a frequent flyer. Like, he was just here 2 weeks ago. He was here a month ago. All these things. And I said, so, okay, that's fine. So how is this affecting him nutritionally? Well, she was like, well, he's lying. He has diabetes, but he's non-compliant. I said, so why is he non-compliant? Well, he just doesn't take his medicine. So, okay. So then we had to have a conversation. So I wanted to pull her to the side, and I said, okay, so he's not taking his medicine. It's up to you as a dietitian to figure out why he's not taking his medicine. Not, you don't pass your judgment based on what you've ascertained from the chart and what you think you saw when you walked in the room. You have to listen. We dug a little deeper. Come to find out, the man was homeless, or he wasn't physically living on the street, but he was in between homes. He was in a shelter one point in time. He was under the bridge over by Grady another time. Now he was way over in Emory, Decatur. And I'm like, so then when we figured that out, what's that? He's food insecure. If you're food insecure, you got diabetes, and you're homeless, the likelihood of you taking your medicine is very slim, because you don't even know where your next meal is coming from. And so that one incident, even though she cried because she said I was being mean to her, but that one incident for her changed how she delivered her messages to patients from that point forward. And that was the whole point. It was a teachable moment for you to understand that it ain't got nothing to do with what you think, or what, your goal is to take what you've learned in these classes and put it together in a nutrition care process. You're supposed to take what you learn in these classes, put them together in a systematic way to be able to make decisions based on that. But all of the pieces of the puzzle have to be there for you to do that. And at no point in the nutrition care process does it say, let me add in my personal beliefs about what this person done told me. It ain't got nothing to do with you. You got to remove yourself from the situation and listen to what the patient is saying. So, any other questions? I like the questions. They help me.
I have a question.
Yes.
What would you say your main scope of duty consists of during the times you worked in places that have like very high food insecurity? And like, would you say that it kind of focused more on like educating the patients and the individuals there versus like treating? Like, what was your main scope of duty?
So it just depends on which area. So when I worked at the Veterans Home, which is in Milledgeville, which is right outside of Macon, of course, it was a lot of education. Education for the veterans, education for the families, and different things like that. In the hospital, it was educating, but practical education. So more like nutrition counseling in the hospital. Nutrition in there, it was more like, let's figure out what do you have access to, and how we can utilize those things to kind of get better outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. Because a lot of times, the things that we recommend for people, sometimes it's just never heard of. Like I said, I'm from Alabama, so I'm just be real honest to you. I was a nutrition student, and I didn't know what quinoa was. I just didn't know. My grandmother never cooked that, and my parents never cooked that. That was not what was in my house. And so when we say, well, we can use quinoa instead of a brown rice and this, that, and the third, it's just kind of like, well, they don't know what it is. If they don't know what it is, then the likelihood of them knowing how to prepare it is very slim as well. Now, the irony for that with me is I have to always, 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 always have somebody on my team who is comfortable in the kitchen, because even though I'm a dietitian, I do not really like to cook, and I am not a fan of being in the kitchen. And so if you want to make me look uncomfortable, you throw me in the kitchen with a whole bunch of pots and pans, and I just lose it. So what I like to do is I do the education, and then I bring somebody else who likes to cook and do food demos, and we show you how to make it together. So does that answer your question?
Yes, I answered my question.
Okay. Another thing that I did a lot of was in the when I worked in rural, um, which a lot of people don't really talk about, but this is something that I've integrated with our students here as well, is that I think it's very important to do sort of an integrative approach to treatment. So I spent a lot of time with pharmacy. I spent a lot of time with the doctors, because I wanted to make sure that we had a sort of a continuous plan of care. For example, one of the things that the students are going to be doing this year is, and I'll make sure I share the links with you guys, or with Michaela so that she can share with the group, is that in about 2 weeks, even though they're nervous about it, they're going to be doing I call it an integrative approach to medicine, or integrative approach to nutrition. So it's the PharmD versus the RD. So one of my good friends is a pharmacist, and who works at a federally funded clinic in South Carolina. So he has a pharmacy student. I have dietetic students. So what we've decided to do is every 2 weeks, his student and two of my students will get together, and they will take one of his patients, and they will look at it from two different perspectives. So his student will obviously look at it from the pharmacy perspective. Our student will look at it from the nutrition perspective or the dietitian's perspective. And so it's 2 weeks because they obviously, we don't live in the same place. So they need to have time to review the case and work out the stuff that they need to do. They need to be able to do the ADIME and nutrition care plan and all of that. But then they also need to come together virtually to discuss what they both recommended for the patient. And then they ultimately have to turn it into a presentation via Zoom that they'll send a link out to, and then whoever we share it with will join in to watch us, and they will discuss how they've taken this approach and why. So it may be some nutrition, drug and nutrient interaction stuff going on. It may be some cross collaborations about diet and health education. I think the very first patient is a type 2 diabetic with a below knee amputation. So I think my student, well, I know she is. She's a little nervous about it because she don't really want to do. She thinks it's her first time. And I was like, it's okay. Like, we'll be here to guide you. So he's going to manage it from the pharmacy side, and I'll be managing it from the nutrition side. But the students, they will lead the conversation. So just like this, if you were on, you can ask questions and say, well, why didn't you make this recommendation versus that recommendation? And then if he has students, why are you using this type of insulin versus that type of insulin? And then she'll chime in and say, well, these are the types of food options. When we say consistent carb, this is what we mean, you know. So I think and for me, that's a real live example of how we can really bring nutrition to the forefront when it comes to healthcare, because a lot of people, pharmacies, doctors, they don't really know what we do.
Right.
Yeah. Any other questions? Ask away. I got time. I ain't doing nothing today because they not here. They on they out. The students are not here. Thank God.
What is some of the work that you've done trying to solve food insecurities and helping those who are less fortunate or educated?
Okay. So I don't want to share all of the details because one of them, the biggest one, is my long-term goal. And I'll just give a synopsis of it. I won't share all of the details. But the long-term goal is to have a federally funded mobile market that brings access to fresh fruits and vegetables or accessible products to rural communities. So it will cross 3 states. So I will start in Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi. And so it'll be called the Digest Mobile. And what the Digest Mobile will do is um, hopefully, in a nutshell, there'll be an option. There'll be two ways. So people who obviously live in a community like you and I, who are tech savvy, we will be able to use an app to be able to purchase certain things from the like pre-order, and then when you come to wherever location that we've set up as a pod, point of dispensing, then you can go. You'll have a separate sort of entry or section where you can get your things, and then the people in the community who don't have those things will have a schedule that goes out that says, okay, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the digest mobile will be X, Y, and Z. So I'm trying to partner with local farmers to be able to purchase this and become like a vendor for the USDA, and then be able to resell to the community, but sell it as by accepting WIC vouchers, regular cash and debit payments, also EBT, SNAP benefits, and different things like that. Okay, so that's my ultimate plan, which we're in like the third phase of the preliminary, so it's been a long thing. Now, in my work, what I have done at Georgia War, we created the Hope Garden, and the Hope Garden is basically something for the veterans to do. Um, it was a community garden that the veterans managed, and it just kind of gave them something to do because a lot of them just didn't like being inside all the time. So we would we had a garden, and so we would harvest things from the garden, but then whatever we harvest, whatever it was, if it was in season, we would turn it into something that in an item that we would put on the menu. So I would host like a nutrition education session, or what I would call Tasty Tuesdays. And on Tasty Tuesdays, we would use whatever ingredient that we took from the garden in some new dish. So it could be I've had the Green Machine, which was a smoothie. I have had that had kale and stuff in it and spinach in it, and but they thought that they wouldn't like it because it was green, and but once they tasted it, they liked it, and so then everything that had um they had to do a survey, but everything that had like a 85% or higher on the survey, we would add to the rotation cycle for the menu as a special item for them. What else did we do? So I've done that. I have done a few. Um, I did a kind of like a health fair, but it wasn't really called a health fair. But again, one of my best friend's sister is a physician back home in Alabama. So what we did was she hosted a health fair, and at the health fair we incorporated everybody. So everybody who we knew who was in healthcare in some sort of way. She's a physician. My mother's a nurse. We have two other friends that went to school with us who are OTs and PTs and pharmacists, and then myself. So what we did was you basically had checkpoints. So you got to see everybody at that particular time. So we had, you whatever she would see them for. My mother was taking blood pressures. Our friend who's a pharmacist was going over medical review with them. Me, I would sit down and say, okay, I know you've been struggling with your diabetes. How can we do X, Y, and Z? So that was a big thing. And that was beautiful. It was actually really, really nice. So those are like the three major things that I've done and that I am working on. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Okay. What else? So do you guys have any questions about like so let me tell you guys a little bit of stuff that I didn't tell you. So when I was in my MPH program, I did my practicum in Houston, Texas at MD Anderson Cancer Center. So I worked in the Health Disparities Research Department and as a cancer prevention trainee. So I've done sort of research nutrition as well. And then let's see, I worked for the Department of Public Health for 2 years. Then I worked as a clinical dietitian, but as a clinical dietitian, they only had one person. So it was me. I did acute care and ICU and dialysis, which dialysis was very hard. And then, like I said, I've done food services as well. So I've done a little bit of the management side of things now as well. So there are a couple different areas where you can ask questions about or just experiences, and I can maybe speak towards those too.
Can you speak more about your research experiences?
So the biggest one obviously has been what I've done at MD Anderson, and then what I'm currently doing for my own study, which I haven't done right. Luckily for me, since I started this role back in July as the director of the internship program, I took this semester off from school, so no writing, none of that. Like I just we needed to separate the two because it was a lot of overlap. It was a lot. So I had to I'm not in school right now. But at MD Anderson, I worked on a program called the I Move Project. And the I Move Project was a program that was designed for minority men and women, African American men and women, and Hispanic men and women. And basically, it was looking at the way in which physical activity either reduced the incidence of new cancers in Harris County, which was like the downtown Houston area. And so two things came out of that. For me, because the program was already up and running, what was interesting was just the cultural differences and the cultural approaches to it. So culturally, the Hispanic population the women for one, would not participate unless the men were involved in some sort of way. So usually would have household participation on one side. For African Americans, the men was not participating at all. And the women only participated because they thought it was a weight loss program. Like they literally would call it that. Like, oh, if I do this walking, it's gonna help me lose weight. So I'm gonna do it. But it was not about that. So and so part of my job as a prevention trainee was to modify the guidelines and the modes of delivery to reach more African American males, which was challenging, but I was able to kind of model it based on some research that I had seen with the use of barbershops. So in the African American community, barbershop is a safe haven for men. The hair salon and the nail salon is a safe haven for women. And so I modeled it based on that to reach more male population. And we had to sort of change sort of the delivery, who was the face of the program. And it took some time, but I think just being, at least with that, that's a good example of how research sometimes can be a challenge, because the project itself wasn't hard. What made it challenging was trying to get the project to meet the people or reach the people, the population that it was intended for. And the only way to be able to do that was you have to unfortunately put people and pieces in places that the target community can identify with. So for lack of better words, like I couldn't send women, or I couldn't send like middle-aged women to deliver information about a project like that to middle-aged African American men in the barbershop. Like that didn't work. So we had to kind of change that. Meaning we had to meet them where they were. So it might be if you had a regular client or a popular client or a popular barber, a well-respected barber or somebody, he might be the person who would deliver the educational portion of it and the details. And where he delivered was different. So of course it was height, weight, anthropometrics that we had to take, of course. So same thing. African American men are very super masculine, hyper masculine at times. So you have to be very careful who and what was doing, who were doing what things. And so, but it ended up working a lot better. We still didn't meet our numbers, but when I got there, I think the program might have had two African American males in it, and one of them had dropped out after me being there for a week. And so by the time I left, we had gotten the numbers up to like 15, which was good. Yeah. So.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Sorry, y'all. I'm sorry to drink I'm a dietitian, but I'm sorry to drink my iced coffee in front of y'all. I'm sorry.
I have one more follow-up then, because you said you had turned around your grades like as soon as you got into the nutrition program, and the same thing happened for me. I feel like we have similar stories, although I'm sure they're very different too. But And it turned around partly for me, like you said, because all these abstract scientific concepts, you could now see how they're practically applied and what's happening in biochemistry in your body. But also, I changed my studying habits. So I'm wondering if you could tell the students a little bit about how you studied and time management skills and like what specific strategies work for you that you think might help them in their studies.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the easiest way to talk about this is to talk about how I study now as a graduate student and how I study for the exam versus how I was in undergrad. So part of your being successful in any of these programs is figuring out what works best for you when it comes to preparation. I like to write. I'm a writer. I have to create things. So that helps. But you have to decide, or you have to figure out a couple things. One, when you are most efficient and effective, like when are you most alert? Two, how much studying, like how you can break this stuff up into sections so that you can digest it all. And then three, how you apply it. So for me, when I had to revamp my studying tactics, I am one of those people, I try to minimize the amount of stress. So when you got an exam coming up, because in graduate school, for example, I had my first exam was like over 10 chapters, and it was straight handwritten. We don't do multiple choice exams, and I was like, well, whoa, what is this? Because I don't know. But obviously, if you get a syllabus and you look at it and it say exam 1 on October 7th, and it's over chapters 1 through 10, that's overwhelming because you know how dense and deep these chapters can get. So for me, the first step for me is to break that down. All right, so how can I study 10 chapters by October 7th? And if it's 2 chapters a week, 2 chapters a month, however. So I have to physically break it down into smaller portions. That's the one thing. In addition to smaller portions, I know that I'm most alert in the morning, which kind of sucks now since I work, obviously. So it's hard for me I can be very productive at work, but by the time I get home, I'm usually pretty tired. But I know that the morning is a good time for me to study. And I don't study, how people say, oh, I'm going to study for 8 hours. Absolutely not. I am not about to sit in a book for 8 hours. I am 32 years old. We don't have a social life. So I'm going to study. For me, I have to break that up into chunks as well. So if I'm going to study for 5 hours, I might do an hour and a half and then a 30-minute break and then come back and do another hour and a half. Like I have to do it like that. And you feel more productive and more like you've reached your goal. So I put all of my stuff in the SMART goals and just say, okay, I'm going to study for an hour and a half. I'm only going to look at this chapter and I'm going to try to get through these many pages. And it's helpful. Some things that I didn't do as an undergrad that I do now. In undergrad, my study tactics were very much so like my studying when I was a student in high school. So I would wait to a week or so before the test, crack open the book, and cram. And then I take the test. In high school, I would pass them. In undergrad, not so much. And so I changed that. So now you just got to give yourself enough time because a lot of this, even so with the RD exam, with preparing for classes, with school, all of that, I think, at least in my experiences, is not that you don't know the material. It is the anxiety around taking it and the fact that you know that you haven't put in enough time to study for everything that you need to study for. If you study 10 chapters, if you have a test that's on 10 chapters and you've only studied 6 of them, the anxiety around not studying those last 4 chapters is what's going to make you fail the test because you're going to say before you even start, well, if they ask me any questions on X, Y, and Z, I know that. But if I get something about this, and this, and it, whatever was in those last 4 chapters, you're going to say, well, I don't know that. So you've put that out there in the atmosphere already, for one. And two, when that question pops up or when you get a question like that on the exam and it makes you nervous, now you've messed up your psyche for everything moving forward. So it's easier to stay on top of it and give yourself positive reinforcement if you can and will like break it down into smaller portions. So I do it, and I another thing that I do is I recreate exams. Like I'll make my own exam up based off of what they may ask me. Sometimes it helps. It's a lot of work, but sometimes it's not. But most cases for me it has been useful because if you rewrite your own exams and say, well, this is what they could possibly ask me about this particular theory or this particular topic or this particular subject matter, then when it actually pops up, there are several things that you're going to already know about it. And then you can effectively do process of elimination if you have to. But sometimes it's right there. Um, for the RD exam, it depends on what you guys use to study, but I had only MN. And of course, MN is broken down into domains. And so what I did was the first time I just crammed it. I could, but it was more so memorization. But I crammed it, and I could regurgitate that book backwards and forward. You asked me about something, I could tell you what the answer was. I couldn't tell you why, but I knew it was the answer. The second time I took it, pretty much the same thing. The last time I had to change my study tactics. So of course you have to wait 6 weeks, 90 days before you can take the test again, I think. So what I did was I studied for 6 weeks. I did 4 weeks of just domain. So I did 1 week on each domain, creating my own test, making sure I knew that domain backwards and forwards. And I wrote out all of the stuff I needed to write out. The last 2 weeks, week 5, I think I did just test prep, like just questions. So week 5 and week 6, I had 2 times where I had somebody take me to the library and mock exam me, meaning they gave me the questions from a practice test. They took my phone. We did the whole 2 hour setup, just like if I was taking the RD exam. And it sounds a bit extreme, but I'm a firm believer that it all helped because I passed. And yeah, so I sat there. She took my phone. She proctored me for 2 hours. And what was fun, what was interesting was the same questions that made me nervous on my practice exams were the same ones that were making me nervous and that I had missed on the actual exam. And for me, it was the management questions and the food service questions. So then that last couple of days before the exam, I just kind of streamlined and focused on that stuff. So you got to be strategic. That's more than more. That's you be strategic in how you approach it. Does that help? I know I'm long-winded, y'all. I hear that all the time. I learned that from my grandma. It was the Alabama way. We don't have nothing to do but sit on the porch and talk all day.
That's awesome. You've been really helpful with like everything you've said. It's like amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm telling you, it helps. I've talked to our girls about doing that a lot, and of course, a lot of times some people will take bits and pieces of it. All of it won't work for everybody, but you have to figure out the way to incorporate it into what works for you. And so, some people it won't hit you until you take the exam and fail it, and then it's like, oh my god, now I need to try to figure something else out. And that's just the way it is. We that's how we think as humans. Because I mean, just the reality of it is that's just kind of how it is. You know. What else, you guys? This has been really nice. I have enjoyed this. This has been a very good relief for me because being an internship director, I don't know if they've ever told you guys, but it's hard. And we have 16 students. So trying to place 16 people in the middle of COVID, and every day a hospital calls me and say, well, we're not taking students no more. Or the food, and then me having to try to come up with new ways to get them to meet these competencies, which is how they end up with this project with their pharmacy. That stuff is challenging. And yeah, so I've enjoyed just this because this stuff I could talk about all day.
Do you have any favorite books or nutrition related books?
Any favorite nutrition related books? Actually, that's a good question. I really don't. Um, what do I read the most of? This gonna sound crazy. Let me see if I got it. So I have this book, and it's not even a like a book, like a not like a this is a it's a it's an exam prep book, right? And so I bought this book about a year or so ago from these ladies who are creating like exam prep stuff. But anyway, what I like about it is it's just a quick way for me to basically like study stuff or review stuff and it not be so dense and overwhelming. So in these topics, so I read this a lot. So I broke this up the same way I did the practice studying for the RD exam. I'll tell you guys, it's by Sage Nutrition. I'll send you the link to it. But they are very, very helpful. And I read it because, like I said, I've been out of school now from nutrition as a BS in nutrition since 2012, so it's at 8 years. And a lot can change in 8 years, a lot can change in a year. And a lot of the concepts are still similar. But when you have students who are from Pennsylvania State and Florida and master's trained student from this school, they ask you questions. And if you don't know it, or if you don't, or you seem like you don't know it, then it can become like, okay, well, then they don't, then it breaks down that trust of like, oh, well, you really know what you're talking about, or you don't know what you're talking about. So for me, it's just a way to kind of to stay abreast with what's going on. For pleasure, though, I don't necessarily read nutrition stuff for pleasure. The most recent book I've read was, I have two. John, what the man? It's a guy named John Bach, I think, or somebody. But I read this finance book about kind of like paying yourself and all that stuff from your work. And then I read this other book about dating. And so, like, I read a lot of dating books just because, I want to make sure that I am being reasonable and realistic as I enter the dating pool in 2020. It's kind of hard with COVID, but I had to make sure, I wanted to make sure I had the most recent information about dating before I jumped out there. So, but I read a lot of those, and they're all at home. But I usually read my books on Sunday. I do self-care Sundays at the park. Well, that was before it got cold. But yeah, so I spend a couple hours at the park and I read a little bit and take that away. That's how I get ready for the week. What else? I just have to laugh at myself sometimes because I'm like, people always say you are just so open about everything. I mean, I'm like, well, it ain't, why would I not share it? It's not hurting anybody. It's not hurting me. Me keeping it inside ain't gonna hurt. I mean, or me sharing it ain't gonna hurt either. Yeah. Read you some dating books. Let me tell you, they help.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so I actually have to go because I have this class at 12. But I just wanted to say I really appreciate this meeting. I love like hearing your stories. I think it's so cool. I don't know, participating even though there's like all this going on. I feel like I don't know. It's like good to know that there's people still,
Yeah.
out there to talk about this. And I'm a freshman still, so this is a whole new like everything's really new for me in a way. So I just appreciate you experience as you are and coming and telling your story, and it's very inspirational. And thank you, Michaela, too, for being the organizer for everything. Thank you, guys.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining. And so if you have questions, I'll make sure, or if any of you guys have questions when we leave, I'll make sure Michaela has or shares my information. You guys are more than welcome to email, DM, Twitter, however you want to get to me, you can get to me and I'll respond. I do that for all of the students. What else? We have more. We got two. What? I don't even know how long we were on. Was it to 12:30? Because I blocked off the whole time, so I'm good. If y'all ready to go, I mean, it's however y'all want to do it. Because I'm literally not doing anything. Like I have closed out everything that's internship related. It's closed right now on purpose.
Well, the meetings usually end at 12:15. But yeah, and it's an exam week for a lot of us, so I'm pretty sure a lot of people I want to keep within that time frame. But does anyone have any questions? Because if not, I'm just going to ask Mr. Madison to end with like just general advice for us as we like continue journeys, basically. Just, but if anyone has like any question, go ahead and ask it. Okay. Bye, Dr. Wanders.
Bye. Let's see, no questions. I'm looking through the list here to see who all.
Okay, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I have a question. How do you come across like those that aren't very nutrition educated and like enforce or not enforce them, but like how do you emphasize on the fact that nutrition is a big factor of their health to those that aren't very like nutrition educated?
That's a really good question. So you'll come in contact with that a lot, primarily because a lot of people don't know what dietitians do. That's that. So as a dietitian, you're trained as a dietitian, but you're way more than that. You're a counselor, you're a social worker, you're everything. So when it comes to nutrition education or speaking to people about nutrition, I think it's very, very important to two things. Not same like I told my previous student, to not force your nutritional beliefs and values onto that person, and to also, the second thing is to meet them where they are. And that sounds very cliche in general, but what I mean specifically about that is you really, really, really have to talk to them to figure out what they're familiar with and what they're comfortable with. And that's where you direct and guide your education. You can't really, and it says, are you not, I wouldn't recommend teaching people or teaching individuals about everything when they only need to know about one specific thing or two specific things. And what happens when we first graduate and go into the workforce and finish our intern, we have all this knowledge, and you just want to just dump it all on the people right there. You just want to, you're welcome. You just want to just dump it all on the people at one time. And it can be overwhelming. Think about when you first started learning about this stuff, how overwhelming it was or is for you. It's the same for them. So I try to make it as relevant, as fun, as culturally competent as possible. That's why you ask those questions in teaching about, or in your assessment. What do you normally eat? Who normally purchases the food? Where do you live? Where is it close to? And then that kind of gives you a quick snapshot of how you need to modify or tailor your education stuff right then and there. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So yeah, I've had several clients and patients to say, well, you know, you're the food police. You're here to tell me what I can't eat. And that's not necessarily always the case. You know, there's a huge misconception. A good example would be when providing diabetes education. When you go into a room and you say that you're a dietitian and you're talking to a diabetic, the first thing that they say is, I know I can't eat no carbs, I can't have no sugar. And it's like, well, that's not 100% true. We said consistent carbs, but then even that within itself. Well, when you say consistent carb, you have to think, what is that? Like, do you know what that means? We just mean the same or close to the same amount at each meal. But for a person who's newly diagnosed, they don't know what consistent carb is. They just say okay. They just say okay because they want you to get out of the room. But you sit there and you explain it, and it may take more than one time. You know, it may take 2 times. It may even take 3 times. But you have to explain and say, this doesn't mean that you can't have the things that you love. Don't even give them that whole. I don't even give that whole spiel, just in moderation. I don't even say that. I literally just say to them, I said, so that's not 100% true. This is how you can still eat the things or the types of things that you typically would eat, but it not affect your blood sugar in such a massive way, such an aggressive way. So, and I'll say something, have you ever heard the term consistent carb? And they say, well, yeah, the last lady talked to me about that. I'm saying, so what does that mean? And then when they start explaining, you realize that they don't really know what it means. And then I start pulling out my start pulling out my examples. I have folders and I have pamphlets, and I say, look, this is what a consistent carb looks like. So at breakfast you're gonna have this, at lunch you're gonna have this, at dinner you can have this. And that don't, and, you know, and that's not every day the same thing. The point is just you want to have close to, or the exact, you know, as close to the same amount at each meal, so it doesn't affect your how you. And then you want to ask them, how are you taking your insulin? Are you taking it before or after? My grandmother, she would sit there and eat everything under the sun. She'd have a plate so heavy it'd be folded in the middle. I said, Grandma, now you know that's too much food. Literally. I said, now why? Well, she said, well, my doctor said. I said, well, see, okay. And so then she would eat all the food and then take the insulin. I'm like, I don't think that's how that works. She was like, well, that's what he told me. If my blood sugar be real high, I need to titrate up and then I need to take some more. I said, no, ma'am, that's not how that works. I think you're supposed to take it before you eat so that it can already be starting to prepare itself to work for when you eat. So she couldn't understand why she would eat all this food and then her sugars would still be super, super high. But that's because your blood sugar was already 1,000. Not literally, but you know, it was high, but your blood sugar is already 1,000 by the time, and you didn't eat all this food. Now, when you take the insulin and the insulin starts doing what it's supposed to do, it only brought it down to 600, which is still too high. Had you taken it before, it would have started to work as soon as, you know what I mean? Does that make sense? So you have to really kind of try and figure out where the disconnects are for them, because they will say, I understand, I got it. But that's just because they don't really want to spend that time. But in order for them to be effective, you got to spend the time. I've had 30 minutes consults and I've had 15-minute consults. And the 30-minute consult people, they are more compliant than the 15-minute consult people. But the 15-minute consult people are the ones who do all the talking. You don't get to talk that much with them because they telling you how much they know already. So it's like, okay, girl, all right, I'll talk to you later. And then they come back and the doctor then told them they finna cut their toe off. And then they was like, oh my God. Well, see, girl, if you had to give me 15 more minutes, we could have fixed that, you know? But, so that type of deal. Makes sense? And I will tell you, I teach like this too. So when I'm in class with the students, I teach the same way. They say I'm super animated. I don't think so. But I'm just like, look, I just want y'all to get it in a real life scenario way. That's all. Because what they do in those textbooks, and the books are great. Krause and the nutrition therapy, for all those books are wonderful. But what the books don't tell you that happens in real life is that it's pretty obvious. If you're studying this week, if this is the week that we're focusing on endocrinology, you know on Friday you got a test, you know your test answers are going to be about diabetes and diabetic ketoacidosis. Like, you know that because that's what you prepare for the whole week. What the book doesn't tell you is that, and so when they give you the scenarios out the book, they are perfectly designed. The people don't have nothing else going on except for diabetes, type 2, glucose high, sodium low, renal disease, all that stuff. You walk in the hospital and you got a new person who's a diabetic. You got that. They got hypertension. They got COPD. They're a smoker. They're overweight. There's all that stuff. So now you're looking like, oh my God, where do I start? And so that's the difference. And the book is not designed like that. The book doesn't give you a crash course in how to prioritize what's going on with these patients.
You are animated, Mr. Madison. Just putting that out there.
That's what they said now. I don't believe it, but that's what the people say now.
No, we love it. We love it. And it sucks that we have to cut the time short. But in the past, like in the last few minutes of the meeting, could you just give general advice for the members as they go through their journeys?
Yes, absolutely. So my general advice would be same thing I give my students. And I know as much as I say it and as much as it sounds so simple, and it's not simple. Trust me, I get it. Don't make the stuff more stressful than it has to be. You have to be very, very much, and that's with school, that's with work, that's with life, any of those things. If it's within your control, You handle what's in your control. If it's out of your control, you do what you can do within the parameters of what you've been given to work with. And so when it comes to studying and preparing to matriculate through this dietetic internship journey or this nutrition program, master's, whatever, undergrad, whatever you're doing, you handle the things that you can handle. You prioritize it because at the end of the day, you're going to be the person who's going to be making the decisions. One thing that I also encourage our students to do is to find ways to be creative with your degree. You know, a lot of people who go into nutrition don't realize that when they go into the hospitals, they didn't even really want to be a clinical dietitian because you haven't really seen what clinical dietitians do in the hospital. I don't like clinical dietetics. I can't stand it. I didn't even know I wanted to be, I didn't even like long-term care. I didn't think I did, but I learned more working with geriatrics than I ever did in clinical. Because in geriatrics, they train, like I said, they're train wrecks. They have everything going on. So it's always a critical case. Versus in the hospital, same thing. If you come in there in 3 days, the goal is to get you out and back home within 3 days. So we're going to do what we need to do to get you ready to go and give you some supplements and whatever. And that's it. Or, you know, but unless you're on the tube feeding. So figure out ways to be creative so that you can enjoy doing what you do. Don't think that you just have to be a clinical dietitian or a WIC nutritionist or a school nutrition director. The possibilities when it comes to nutrition is so endless, but you have to figure out a way to make it fun and make it exciting. And that's the biggest takeaway.
Thank you. Thank
You
you
are
so much. All right.
Y'all are so welcome. So thank you for having me. Thank you. No, you guys are so great. So if you guys have any questions, please, Michaela, share my contact information. So if people want to ask later, and when I say you can share everything, Instagram,
Okay.
all of it. I don't care. People DM me all the time. It's fine.
Okay.
But yeah, if you guys have any questions, whether it be about anything, and if I know somebody who knows somebody that can help, I will definitely connect you with those people because everything that I have done has been based on my network. Now you got to do your work too, because when the people put their name on you and the people start pulling your records and your transcripts, you got to have done your portion of the job too. But people are definitely willing to help you when you've been consistent and you've been and they know that you gonna operate with integrity. So I don't mind helping any student because people have helped me. That's the only way that I've gotten to be where I am. All right.
Thank you so much.
You're absolutely welcome.
All right. Well, have a great day. And thank you so much, Mr. Madison, again. We'll be sure to share your contact information with everyone. So
All right.
have a great day.
Y'all
Thank
too.
you.
Good
Have a
luck
great
with
one.
everything.
Bye.
Bye.